Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Well, we are going to be doing another comparison versus distro. Let's see what is better between Linux Mint, which is the based on Ubuntu, and Linux Mint Debian Edition, obviously based on Debian. So throughout this video, if I just say Linux Mint, we're talking about the Ubuntu-based version. And if I say Linux Mint Debian or LMDE, of course, that's Linux Mint Debian Edition, just an FYI over there. We're going to be comparing and contrasting both of these distros. And as I'm doing with the previous ones, I'm installing them into the virtual machine. The first one of these I did without installing, just looking at the ISOs. I just didn't think it ran as well. So I've installed them. I have ran the updates. Now, today they did drop the Linux Mint 19.3 beta. We're not using that. We're using the Linux Mint 19.2, the most recent up-to-date, and we're using Linux Mint Debian Edition version 3, also with the up-to-date. And with that one, I did need to install the VirtualBox guest editions, so that way we can see them both kind of in their full screens and things like that. Before we dive in, if you want to help support the channel, head on over to switchedtolinux.com/support. I have Patreon. I also have thinklifemedia.com. There's a direct PayPal link. I do have a merch store, shop.switchedtolinux.com. And I do have a list of affiliates. You can go on and yeah, my my ad blocking system is not working right now because I'm trying to fix the iPad, and I needed to take off all my blocking scripts in case something that was interfering. So pardon all the ads all over the place. But you can take a vacation to Universal if you want. All right. So anyway, back over to getting these. Of course, these are all released by the same project. The basic one is Linux Mint, which is based on Ubuntu. And this one here is just the flagship, super polished, super easy to use, excellent platform. The other one is kind of like their background project of Ubuntu goes crazy, which if you follow the trends, they very well may already be approaching that space rapidly. Linux Mint Debian Edition is their test to see how quickly they can jump to abandoning the Ubuntu core if they need to. And if you ask me, they're actually pretty close. So if you head on over to the download tab, you can grab the official downloads. Now, the first thing that we find is that Linux Mint is available in 3 desktop environments. Not that you couldn't put other desktop environments on top of them, and I actually have videos about how to do that. But out of the box, we have Cinnamon, Mate, and XFCE. Linux Mint Debian Edition, these ones you only have your Cinnamon version at this point in time. Now, as of right now, they are both available in both 32 and 64-bit. With the Ubuntu, the next Ubuntu core, then they are dropping 32-bit support, so it's most likely Linux Mint going forward will probably not support 32-bit, but I don't know that for sure. The Linux Mint Debian Edition may very well support it because this is based on Debian, and Debian has not dropped 32-bit support moving forward. So you can go ahead and download those from your individual places. Now, as I boot up the machines, the first one we're going to be looking at is the Linux Mint based on Ubuntu. And as I boot these machines up, I'll just give you a brief walk through the installation process. If you are new to Linux, you want to go with the traditional one based on Ubuntu because the installer on the Ubuntu version is the Ubuntu installer. It is extraordinarily easy to use. It does everything well that we need it to do. You're not going to have any real issues with it. The one that comes with Linux Mint Debian Edition is a much harder to install to work with. You will probably have to go into your disks and do some partitioning and set a mount point. There may or may not be multiple installers. I can't remember. I only found the default one when you say, hey, let's install it right from the desktop, and it is a little bit more of a pain. Also, if you are testing it in a virtual machine, the one based on Linux Mint Debian Edition, the LMDE, is not, that is not actually, my train of thought has derailed because my screen just opened up in front of me there. I was like, it's ready to go. No, we talked about the installer. The other thing is the guest editions on the virtual machines. If you're testing it on a virtual machine, Debian Stretch does not install the guest editions out of the box. So you're going to have to do that to experiment with it, which I've actually did install them over here. And maybe, I don't know if it's worth doing a full video on that because not a lot of distros need that anymore. But anyway, with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive right on in. So this is our Linux Mint based on Ubuntu. So you can see here we are on Linux Mint 19.2, Cinnamon Edition 64-bit. This is the welcome screen. And the welcome screen is going to be similar on both of them. That's the first steps wants you to set up your system snapshots, launch your driver manager, update manager. Now, the option that we have here is to choose a desktop layout. So the modern desktop layout is the circa Windows Vista and beyond, where applications are pinned to the taskbar, versus the old traditional, the applications are quick launchers. So this is like your circa Windows XP. And so I still prefer the old XP, but I actually have a video about how you can make your modern layout, which does look a lot nicer, how to make your modern layout behave exactly like that. And as of the absolute latest version of Cinnamon right now, you can still do it, as I have actually just had to redo it on my Arch system after a big Cinnamon update. And so you can choose your layout. We have basic system settings. And so we looked at the installation. Let's have a quick look at your system tools. So inside of your system settings, we do have a variety of different tools in here. We do have down here, we have a driver manager. This is going to be really big for you, particularly if you're running any type of hardware that is more unusual, or maybe something that is like a Broadcom wireless card or something like that. The driver manager, which is an Ubuntu tool, is going to be able to quickly see that and allow you to update it. So in this case here, you can see that it's giving us the option, don't use it, or we can enable the guest editions, which is actually going to give us a little bit better performance in this. So if I were to actually be building this out and using this computer as some work machine, as a VM, I would want to install this. In this case, we're not going to, but anything in this is going to be a proprietary driver that's not going to be found in the Linux kernel. You have the option to install it right from here. That's going to be something that's going to be easier to do in the Ubuntu version versus the Debian version. Everything else here is going to be pretty much the same. We have our theming effects. Some people have commented on the amount and degree of themes inside of here. So let's go ahead and have a look at this. We have 3 basic window borders. We have a variety of different colors. We have here also a variety of different colors, so you can match your button color and your folder colors if you want. 2 mouse pointers. And we do have a variety of light and dark theme on different colors. We have our basic Linux mints and just some other basic guys. Now, these are all in the Cinnamon settings, so pretty much everything's going to be the same. Right-clicking the desktop. You do have now, Linux Mint uses the package base of Ubuntu, but then it's going to add some extra elements on top of it to give us these Cinnamon tools and things like that. So some of those other Mint specific tools, if you go into the menu and you look at your accessories, for example, USB image writers, things like this, all of these tools. Also, you have your text editor. Where's it at? You have your basic text editor. You have your basic video media player. All these are kind of based on the GNOME players. Now, I believe in 19.3 they're actually rolling back to the basic GNOME ones. I think I could be wrong about that, but I just glanced at some of the early release notes and have not had a chance to dig through them in fine detail yet. But they do have a variety of separate tools that are specific to Linux Mint here. Those are all going to be the same within your system. Now, as far as the package version, since this is more based on Ubuntu, the other one's more based on Debian, you are most likely going to find newer versions. So let's just go ahead and have a look at a few software versions of what we're going to get. So here is our LibreOffice, and our LibreOffice, if we actually, let me go ahead and have a look at our toolbars here. So it does look like we're not the brand newest, but we're actually pretty old. So we are at 6.0.7.3 on LibreOffice. Another package might be GIMP. This one here actually I think is still the 2.8. I have no idea why, but it is still 2.8 on Linux Mint. even on based on Ubuntu here. So we have 2.8.22 on GIMP there. And let's just have a quick look at a couple other applications here. Firefox is probably going to be the newer version. We're probably going to have an ESR on Linux Mint Debian Edition. I don't remember, but we'll go ahead and have a look at that. So Firefox. So yeah, Firefox, we're at 70.01. I just installed this in the machine today. And both of these have just been installed into the machine and updated according to their latest updates. And let's have a look at VLC. So these will be the only applications we have a look at. Sure, why not? And about, so we are looking at 3.0.8. So those are some of the applications that we're going to see. As far as fixing a system, I would say that Ubuntu-based systems are a little bit easier to work with. They're going to break a little bit less, and so you're probably going to have an overall slightly better user experience with Linux Mint Ubuntu versus Linux Mint Debian Edition. And so this is kind of what we're going to see here. So let's go ahead and log on out of this guy, and we will log back into the Linux Mint Debian Edition and have a look at that. All right, so here we are on Linux Mint Debian Edition 3, also based on Cinnamon 64. Again, we have a very familiar layout, the same layout settings that we had in the previous version. First steps, of course, install the system snapshots. Now, we did not have the multimedia codecs in the one based on Ubuntu. The reason is Ubuntu will give you the option to install codecs in the installer. Debian does not. And so what they've did to fix that is they've given you actually an application. So here you can actually install multimedia codecs from the down here from the menu, or you can just go ahead and install it here. There's the update manager and the desktop layout. Again, your traditional versus your modern layout. And most of the rest of what you're going to see is going to be very similar. Now, one of the things you will notice throughout this is that this is not going to be as responsive. This was just how old virtual machines seems to work. And so since we're based on such an older version of Debian, it's going to be a little bit clunkier. That is not something you're going to find installing this on real hardware. That's just an artifact of the VM. Now, the first thing we find in our system settings is we do not have a driver tool. All the other tools we had were there, but we do not have the driver tool because, as we said, that is something that is specific to Ubuntu. And so if you have odd or obscure drivers, odd or obscure hardware, you might need to learn how to install drivers manually following Ubuntu's, Debian scripts. And so other than that, most of the other things are going to be pretty much the same as far as here. So some people were talking about the theming, so let's just go ahead and have a look. So overall, it does actually look like Linux Mint Debian Edition is giving us all of the same options as far as your theming is involved. Everything out of the box here does look pretty much the same. I did mention the installation on Linux Mint Debian Edition is a little bit more difficult, and just because the Debian installer can be a little bit more tricky to use versus the Ubuntu installer. But it does get you there. You might have to follow a few tutorials if you are new to Linux. The other thing that we'll find now, what is the difference between Linux Mint Debian Edition and why not just run Debian with your, with Cinnamon? Well, the reason for that is because we actually have a lot less system bloat in Linux Mint than we do in Debian, which sounds very weird to you. But if you've ever installed stock Debian, you do have a lot of games pre-installed and a lot of other weird things that Linux Mint does not like to do. Although Linux Mint does add some things that they don't do. I don't remember if Debian installs Redshift. We do, though, have our full suite of Linux Mint tools that we were talking about, so you can see those there. You can see our, sound and video. We have our basic media player. We do not have VLC installed out of the box on this one, and so we won't be able to check the version of that. I don't want to go ahead and install it, but let's go ahead and have a look at the rest of the software. So automatically we can see here we are on much older version of LibreOffice. version 6, was it 6.0.7.3 in a Linux Mint based on Ubuntu. This one based on Debian. We are 5.2.7.2. So a significantly older version of many software packages. GIMP should also be a 2.8. We'll see. So the Linux Mint Ubuntu had 2.8.2.2. This one here we have. Where's my? Is it? Oh, there it is. About 2.8.18. So yeah, it's not significantly older. And by the way, if you're kind of new to Linux, you're like, man, I couldn't use GIMP because it's like that. They used to start it like this with multi-window mode. Just go ahead and toggle this to single window mode. It'll be a much more familiar layout for you. All right, the other thing we looked at, let's have a look at Firefox, which I believe they're following the Debian branch and doing an ESR Firefox, but I could be wrong about that. Let's go ahead and have a look. Oh, we're having trouble getting our pages back. Not sure why. Let's go ahead and have a look at our Firefox. So, oh no, it's not an ESR, but it's not a newer version either. Oh, it is an ESR. My apologies. It is an ESR. So we're looking at 68.2 ESR. So ESR is basically like an LTS. It's a little bit more stable of a Firefox. So if you're unfamiliar with that, so we are getting slightly older versions of Firefox, not seriously out of date. It's just that Debian tends to run the ESR instead of the more recent versions. As far as anything else that you're going to find looking through the rest of the system, they're going to be, other than that, pretty much the same. Your update methodology is going to be the same. Here we can install things via Flatpak. Now, regarding some of what we looked at, regarding like GIMP and the versions, you actually, these ones here, okay, this is going to be a little bit different because in Linux Mint Ubuntu. Okay, this one's giving us a Flatpak. All right, so we do have two options for GIMP. My apologies. I wasn't sure if we had the Flatpak version on. So if you do want 2.10, you can install it with the Flatpak version right here. Let's see if... I'm not sure why the other GIMP is not showing up in the repositories, but this is something I've noticed this here on this install that I actually did not notice on when I ran this live, is at least for this virtual machine, and I'm not sure if this is going to be an error in general or if it's just a quirk of my install here, but what's in my software manager does not seem to be lining up with what's in the system. My software manager here was telling me everything is perfectly up to date, but I had like 300 packages to update when I got in here today. But you can actually install. So here's the absolute latest 6.3.3.2. If you want to install a Flatpak for LibreOffice, you can do that. Let me go ahead. I might actually just be in the Flatpak system. Let me go ahead and look at GIMP from here. Okay, yeah, I was in the Flatpak section is why all the Flatpaks are showing up. So this is the one that is the older version that is already installed. So you can check your version number right down here, 2.8.18, and this is the Flatpak version. So if you do want the latest, you can do that through the Flatpaks. All right. Other than that, we are going to be, essentially, we are going to be the same systems outside of those factors. So there's your two comparatives. So let's go ahead and just do a very brief summary. First and foremost, if you are brand new to Linux and you're looking for something to try out, you're going to want to do Linux Mint based on Ubuntu. The installation is a lot easier. The packages are going to be a lot more up to date. It's going to support a little bit more hardware. Just because of the function of how it is and how it's put together and the ease and simplicity of general use. But if you want a more advanced experience, or if you're a more advanced Linux user and maybe you are aware of some of the issues people have with Canonical and want to steer away, there is no shame at all in running Linux Mint Debian Edition. It is also a fabulous distribution. I do run Linux Mint based on Ubuntu on most of my production systems. I have run Linux Mint based on Debian for a while on my media PC as well, and I did not have any issues with that either. You are going to have older packages on the Debian version, obviously, at least until the new version of Linux Mint Debian Edition drops. But even then, we're going to be a little bit older because Debian tends to not update packages as much. Now, this does not mean the packages are not secure, because there are versions and security updates. You are always going to get security updates. It's just that Debian is based on a model that focuses on stability, and they only do security patches until new versions roll. So that's why you have older versions on Linux Mint Debian Edition. Ubuntu is based on Debian, but does roll packages a little bit more frequently because they have a more frequent refresh cycle. Debian only pushes out a new version when it's ready, which means every couple of years. Ubuntu pushes out a new version every 6 months on the nose. And so you're always getting this. Ease of use, fixing system problems. You are going to be able to solve issues on the Ubuntu-based version of Linux Mint way easier than you're going to be able to install it on the Debian version, unless you really do know Linux and how to fix things. Either one of them, if you're comfortable using the terminal, either one of them is going to be fair enough and easy enough to fix, because what works as a solution on one of them is probably also going to work on the other one on a terminal base, but you're going to have a little bit more GUI support in the Ubuntu version. So there's my brief rundown on Linux Mint versus Linux Mint Debian Edition. Let me know your thoughts on all these in the comments down below.